dropout rates for TMS are remarkably low. We see this in clinical studies, whether it's our machine or different TMS machines. They're quite consistent that people generally start to experience benefit, within the second week. And once they see that this is making a difference in their lives, they stick with the treatment. And what limited side effects there are really don't cause many people to drop out.
Who is the ideal candidate for Deep TMS, and are there particular cases where it tends to be especially beneficial?
Because of the insurance requirements and clinical requirements, the folks that are most ideal for TMS are people who've generally not improved from one or more antidepressant medication. Some insurance companies will have additional stipulations, like they've had to try an augmentation or they've had to have failed on multiple rounds of psychotherapy with evidence-based psychotherapy. But generally speaking, these are folks that have major depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, or smoking addiction, who have not seen relief or had such side effects from their medication therapy that they just couldn't continue with it. So either of those would make them a good candidate for TMS.
And what can patients expect during a typical Deep TMS treatment session?
So patients coming in, as I said, it's an outpatient treatment, so they're coming into a clinic. They're sitting down in sort of a comfortable chair under this helmet that's placed over their head. And, the machine is turned on, the stimulation's turned on, and generally what patients will feel is kind of a gentle tapping sensation on their head. And that'll go on for anywhere between 3 and 20 minutes, depending on the nature of the treatment. Right? And it'll go in sort of little bursts of cycles with pauses in between. Now, the nice thing is that, the patient can kind of move around, right? The helmet is on their head in a way that the coil is really clamped down on their scalp to the degree that they can move around. They can watch a show on an iPad. They can potentially read a book. They can talk to the technician, right? So it's not the kind of procedure like an MRI, for example, where you're sort of locked in this chamber. So generally speaking, it's pretty comfortable, right? Patients, the biggest side effects or adverse events patient might experience is some folks get some light headaches early on the first few sessions. There are definitely ways that the technician and the doctor can mitigate that by kind of ramping up the treatment intensity over the first few days, but that tends to go away over the first few sessions as people become acclimated to the feeling. Mm-hmm. Other folks might get, slight tingling sensation in their scalp, or even potentially a little jaw discomfort, given that it might be stimulating parts of the brain that are activating different motor response in the body. But the dropout rates for TMS are remarkably low. We see this in clinical studies, whether it's our machine or different TMS machines. They're quite consistent that people generally start to experience benefit within the second week. And once they see that this is making a difference in their lives, they stick with the treatment. And, what limited side effects there are really don't cause many people to drop out.
Now, you said that the sessions range from 3 minutes to 20 minutes. Can you tell me the difference? Or why it would take 3 minutes or why it would take 20 minutes?
So the standard treatment that's been most studied is a 20-minute treatment. Right, but there are sort of new modalities coming out. So one is called theta burst, right? And it's essentially using a different type of frequency and method of pulses that shrinks the treatment down to 3 minutes. Now, people still have to come into the office, right? And there's sort of the intake process and discussion with the clinician. So whether it's 3 or 20 minutes, maybe doesn't have a huge impact on people's lives. But for those folks who do have some discomfort with the treatment or maybe have scheduling issues, the 3-minute option can be very valuable. And then another thing that's coming around is accelerated TMS options. And this is still being sort of studied and reviewed in many cases by the FDA, but there are clinicians who are starting to look at, can we take these daily treatments that happen over the course of more than a month and shrink them down to a very truncated 5-day period, for example, where you might be doing multiple sessions in a day. And we've seen in some of the early research that can be a very effective treatment for folks as well. So it gives them an option that's maybe not as drawn out from a time perspective.
To get a free copy of the 12-step guide that I created for you, click on the link in the description below. Yeah, and one of the best practices that we learned about while at this conference in Salt Lake City was some of the providers were providing the 20-minute session followed by the theta burst. And the theta burst can be 3, 6, or 9 minutes, depending on if you do 600, 1200, or 800 bursts, or whatever you call them. We've started doing that because, and we've seen some really good results from it. It's just a way to kind of double up on a session and only adding 3, 6, or 9 minutes onto the session. Do you have any comment on that protocol?
Yeah, this is something we've seen quite a bit. I don't know specifically if there's a randomized study that looks at that specific protocol, but there's so much in terms of parameters and variables that you can change with a TMS machine that there's still a lot of unknowns in terms of like what really is the ideal cadence of treatments. What's the ideal length? Should we space these out? Should we add, like you said, theta burst to a standard treatment? What we do know is that it seems to be the more sessions you do, people continue to improve. So even though insurance typically will only cover 36 sessions, in some cases a few more, but generally 36 sessions for depression, in our clinical studies, we've measured out far longer than that, right? And people continue to have improvement in their depression scores beyond session 36. In fact, many patients get better in those first 2 weeks. There are other folks who it takes a little bit longer and they might get better during the long-term maintenance sessions. So that's probably the one thing we do know for sure is that, it seems to be that the more the better, right? But the question of how often to do them, does it damage people's chance of remission if they skip sessions is still a little bit unknown.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, can someone receive too much?
Well, if that's the case, I don't think we've found the threshold yet.
Okay. And I know that there are insurance companies out there that will pre-approve for 60 sessions. Most are 36 sessions. Some will pre-approve for 60 sessions. And kind of one of the things that we've done at Camelback Integrated Health and Wellness is, like I mentioned earlier, we'll do the Deep TMS session, which is 20 minutes. And then we'll add on the theta burst of 3, 6, or 9 minutes, and we won't charge for it. We won't bill insurance for it. If you got value from this video, if you heard what you needed to hear, be sure to like it. Comment if you've got a question or you have something to say. Subscribe to the channel. Camelback Recovery provides treatment services for people struggling with mental health, mental illness, addiction, alcoholism, whatever it may be. So if you or a loved one is struggling and you need some guidance and you need some direction, reach out to us. Our contact information is down below, or you can go to our website, camelbackrecovery.com, whether it be detox, inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, sober living, recovery coaching, sober companion services, whatever it may be. Like I said, we can either help you or make sure that you get sent in the right direction. We help people all over the country, all over the world for that matter. I'll see you on the next video.